Hello and welcome to the podcast series, A Burden for the Times, a conversation on culture and race. I'm your host, Adrian Burden, and I'm with my brothers, Aaron and Anton, to tackle some crucial topics in order to have some clarifying conversations about race. Thank you so much for joining us once again on this special edition of the A Burden for the Times podcast. We've been going through the month of February, and what we're going to do is highlight different historical individuals that have had a significant impact in Black history. Some of these names you will know, and some of these names you might not have ever heard of before. So what we're going to do is this. Aaron, we'll start with you, and just give us the name of the person that you are going to be talking about. I'm going to give my name and bio in just 1 second of who the person I want to be able to highlight is. But let's just, before I jump into the biographical sketch of my individual, Aaron, who's your individual? And then Anton, tell us who your individual is as we begin this podcast.
My individual is going to be Melba Beals. She is, well, I guess I'll talk about what she is later, but yeah, she's my person.
Can you say that again? I don't know that name. Say that again.
Melba Beals.
Melba Beals.
Yes, she's the winner of the Congressional Gold Medal, so we can talk about it.
Okay, sounds good. Interesting teaser. Anton, who do you have?
I have Malcolm X, which I think you said last podcast.
Boy, am I not surprised. This ought to be good. All right, I chose Isabella Bomfree. All right, let me give the bio of my person. Then I'll talk about, then with the second wave of the podcast, after everyone gives their biographical sketch of each individual, what we'll do is then we'll say, what would that person be saying to us today? So let me start off. Isabella Bomfree. Many people already know her, but just don't know her by that name. She was born in 1797. She had about 12 brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, many of them were sold, and so she does not know many of them. What's important, though, is who her master was. I'll say important, but it is interesting in her bio is Mr. Hardenberg. He spoke Dutch, and so actually growing up, she didn't speak English. She actually spoke Dutch. And then later on, when her son, when the master's son, Mr. Hardenberg's son, took over, that was some bad days for her. She was sleeping in a cellar. They didn't have enough space for all the slaves. They had to sell things inside. But at 9 years old, she was purchased by another master. And what happened is that master only knew English. And so therefore, she had to then switch at 9 years old and learn English. She describes during her growing up years that, she would be slapped for saying English words wrong. And actually, she was one time taken to the barn by the master there and was beaten to the point of near unconsciousness because of her English not being good. And so she had to learn to speak it very quickly. What happened, though, at that time is her parents were turned out, which is a phrase which was when a slave had passed his time that they were able to do work and different things. They essentially, I guess you could say, were free. They were given no money, no land. They were just simply turned out to fend for themselves. So her parents were turned out, and Isabella was actually a very physically strong and very tall girl. And in fact, her parents, after they were turned out, begged another man to come and buy Isabella because she was being treated so terribly at the English owner's house. Anyway, because she stood so tall, eventually she was purchased, and then a man that was at a bar purchased her for $300. So she switched owners like crazy throughout her life. When she got there to the Dermont's house, she met Robert, who was her first love. And unfortunately, they were forbidden to marry because he was owned by another slave owner. And because if she had the children would belong to the slave owner that she had. And so therefore, they were forbidden to marry. She was forced to marry this guy named Thomas. And when they got married, that's her husband. And I think she had 13 pregnancies or so during that time. But anyway, after 1817, she was kind of promised that she would be, because she lived in the northern region, kind of promised that she would be able to leave the area to where she was, as far as she was living in indentured like and promised her liberty during her mid-20s. The guy reneged on the agreement, so she fled and she took her son Peter. Now, this is where her life is the key part comes, is that her son was sold illegally out of state, which that did violate the laws of that time there in the North. And so she actually went to court and she fought against her owner and she won the court battle. It was an historic court battle that she had. And later on, she moved to New York City. She attended an AME church and she was really inspired by a bishop, Miss Jane Lee. And she was there and she became a profound speaker. Well, I say pronounced speaker. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but basically she became a famous speaker. She couldn't read or write, but she was an amazing speaker, which makes it even more incredible that she won a court case and with a woman who couldn't read or write. But she's probably known for her speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" That her speech there was the one that really sent her off, and she became a traveling preacher pretty much. She literally left. She was with some Quakers and different things that she was working with. And one of the ladies asked her name as she was getting ready to head out on one of her trips to be able to talk about abolition and the Bible and women's rights. She was getting ready to go on a trip. And so she looked and said, well, my name actually is Sojourner. And because she was preaching the Bible and teaching the Bible, she said, you can call me Sojourner Truth. And so Sojourner Truth actually became, as she began just very much an active abolitionist, sat with Ulysses S. Grant, Lincoln, Andrew Johnson. She had been able to do change for women's rights and the Freedmen Hospital. She had so many incredible accomplishments during her life. Interesting woman, interesting story. She dictated her autobiography, which is an interesting read. And as you look at her autobiography, she dictated to her grandson, I believe it was, because even though when she was died in her 80s or 90s, she never learned to read or write. But an incredible woman, Isabella Baumfree, also known as Sojourner Truth. All right, I'll throw it to you guys. Give me the bio of Malcolm X, Anton, or Aaron, give me your bio of the person you mentioned.
Go ahead, Anton.
Well, obviously my person's Malcolm X. Malcolm X was born Malcolm Little, May 19th, 1925. His father died at an early age and his mother was hospitalized. So he spent the majority of his childhood in foster homes. Growing up, Malcolm obviously had a pretty rough childhood, but he ended up engaging in a lot of illicit activities and it put him in prison, which is where that's the story where Malcolm X that most people know actually begins. In prison, he became a member of the Nation of Islam and very quickly became the face of the nation, which is, again, the 12 years that most people know most about his life. Obviously, he changed his name from Malcolm Little to Malcolm X because he wanted to symbolize his unknown African ancestral name, which is what the nation did by having an X as their last name. Malcolm, during that time, was very staunchly segregationist, wanting to separate the black and white races. He often publicly criticized mainstream civil rights leaders, often not by name, but most people know he was referring to MLK a lot of the times. Malcolm's big thing was expressing pride in being black, even in a time when that was definitely not a popular idea. He's also very critical of the drug rehabilitation programs. He felt that it was white America trying to water down black cultures and black areas. Beginning in the 1950s, the FBI had, they were telling pretty much every civil rights activist, but Malcolm and Martin became very high on their radar. In the 1960s, Malcolm began disillusion with the Nation of Islam, especially the founder, Elijah Muhammad, because he had been in some illicit activity of his own. And at that point, Malcolm was very high on the chasteness of men and women, which is something that Elijah Muhammad violated, drug use of any kind. All these things really bothered Malcolm. And Malcolm then went on a journey. He went to Mecca and a lot of other places and saw that black people and white people could work together. They could co-op in a lot of other environments. It was that in our country specifically, we had put up barriers to keep that from happening. So when Malcolm came back, he was far more mild. He obviously met Martin Luther King Jr. at one point, and he became more of a moderate civil rights activist. And for that, Malcolm began writing his autobiography, dictated to Alex Haley, the same gentleman who wrote Roots. And even before, when he was writing it, he said he probably wouldn't live to see the end because his change in position would make him a target. And Malcolm was assassinated on February 21st, 1965, in New York City by members of the Nation of Islam. Again, there's speculation on other people being involved. But the thing that I'm going to spend more time on is why Malcolm's controversial. So that's the backstory.
Okay. Well, that's helpful to be able to get that backstory of understanding a lot of information. Well, new to me. Aaron, go ahead and give us the bio of your person.
All right. Yeah. So we're talking to Melba Beals. That's her married name. Her the part of life that means the most to us in this context, right, is her name is Melba Patillo. I believe that's the way it's pronounced, Patillo. But she is one of the Arkansas Nine. So Melba, at the age of 14, who was going to Horace Mann High School, an all-black high school, signed up and registered to go to integration, to go to Central High School in Arkansas. And she was one of the 9 young people who went to integrate an all-white school. And as you start seeing her, she was born in 1941. So one of the reasons I find her interesting is because some of these things, right, we hear a lot that these things happened so long ago. And to my knowledge, I mean, as of this recording, she is still alive. So one of the first people, the first black young lady in the group to go to an all-white school. And as she goes into this school, I find it interesting because she goes in and she has to go in as a 14-year-old girl as the enemy. So there's mobs outside yelling and screaming at her. She goes into school every day. The National Guard is there. Troops are sent in to keep her safe. And the students at the school treat her horribly. Students stab her with objects. Pretty much they would try to lure them into places where they could beat these young black kids and beat them up in hallways. And while National Guard people looked on and saw it happening and pretty much said, hey, this is what you get for trying to come. And then as they try to go through their school year, teachers are against them. So the teachers don't want them there. So teachers look the other way as students behave horribly, wickedly toward these 9 individuals. And one of them is even kind of pushed so hard that they strike back. And when they strike back, of course, that's all they needed was to expel them. So they had those kind of things. But then I find it interesting in her story that Melba's not just looked terribly in the white community for trying to integrate. She is belittled in the black community because she's just trying to start trouble for everybody. And so there's a time where she went to have a birthday party and nobody comes to her birthday party because she's just starting trouble and she's just trying to get she's going to get people killed. And it seems like, wow, the people, even in those days were, I mean, as like Anton said about Malcolm X, it's not segregation, just leave things as they are. But the courage of this young lady to go as a 14-year-old to step into school. And there's parts in her story where when you read about her, and she's written a couple books, she's a journalist. So when you read, she sits down with her grandma and at one point, and she wants to commit suicide. She wants to die because of all the hate. So she's getting it from every side. And her grandma's kind of just almost starts like a little Bible study with her, where she says, we're going to come every night and we're going to pray together and we're going to play games. We're going to talk and you're going to talk to me, but we're going to get through this. And her grandma kind of helps her walk through these treacherous days, and she ends up getting a degree, going on to be something. But to be one of those 14, I pictured myself as, could I have done this as a 14-year-old? Endured people pushing me in the hallway, beating me down. And this sets I guess it speaks to me because, right, this sets the stage for my life, right? We went to a predominantly white school. Most of our whole high school, elementary, middle school, high school career. And I don't know if I could have handled it if people were pushing me in the hallway, beating me up. And at one point in her life, I believe it's her mom or grandma tells her, when these people do this to you, just look at them and say thank you. And she talks about all these times where she quoted, I believe it was Psalm 23, I think it was. And she's quoting Psalm 23 and telling people when they knock her food off her tray, do all these things to her, say horrible things, she just looks at them and says, thank you. And like, wow, what an example of someone who has true courage. So that's my person. Melba Patillo, later married Beals.
That's just so I don't know the words humbling, but just sobering in so many ways. I think that with the podcast speaking out, just for injustice, it makes me to feel like, oh wow, so me getting kind of picked on or me getting a meeting canceled because a guy didn't like the color of my skin or whatever seems so petty. I mean, sin is sin, and so I don't want to do the categorization thing, but I am extremely empathetic in listening to these stories, and it just really is. It's just humbling, and you thank God for the peace that He's given so many to be able to navigate that. And as you're talking about it not being so far in the past, it's not. Tabitha's aunt came by the other day, and I didn't realize that my father-in-law, he only went to 1 year of his life and as far as in grade school situation, only his senior year was the only year that he did not go to a segregated school. So 1 year he went into an integrated school. And so it's just, and not grandpa, my father-in-law. So that just is my dad's age so this is not so far in the past as far as all these things taking place and you seeing all this, pushback as far as racial things. It's many people who are participating in the same nonsense are still alive today. Just gives context into what is taking place. Anyway, with those things being said, let's jump into, what would they be saying today? What are their lives teaching us today? I really want to go first with Sojourner Truth. I've really just been reading and doing a lot of study for her and reading her speech about Ain't I a Woman? My message really, I think that she would be specifically to the church. I know that she is many times isolated by many church communities because she was a woman and she was really standing up for women's rights. But in a time when women couldn't even vote, in a time when women couldn't own property or any different things like that, I mean, you look at this is a very specific, her ministry and momentum was going toward those things to be able to change and to fix. And I really believe she made great strides in those areas. So some people write off because of that. She's a feminist. And so therefore, and because she was, in all intents and purposes, she was a preacher. She would take the Bible and she would go and she would travel almost like the ministry of an evangelist. Now, my church polity doesn't align that a woman pastors a church. However, when I do see this woman, I don't think you throw out how God is using this woman to be able to proclaim a message. The Lord put a message on her heart, and here she goes out. I think her message would really be kind of in a lot of ways, but it would really just echo to the church itself. Like, what if the church had been the ones to be leading the charge and helping, her? I thank God that the Quakers were there. They're the ones who bought her freedom at one point, and then were the ones to help her as she was getting ready to fight for her son, Peter. Like, I mean, where are the people, the Trail of Blood people, where there's only the one true church that goes all the way back to Jesus, and it was Baptist churches going back? Well, where's that church? Where is those groups of people during these times that we're saying they had the truth, they knew God, they were close to the Lord, their polity was straight and everything was perfect? Where are you? Where are them during history when we're talking about the most vulnerable being displayed at this point? The reason why I pick a black woman in this time is because one of the greatest cultural divides you are going to find is between a white man and a black woman during this time. Obviously there was definitely, because the white man had all the power, black women were nothing but used and abused, vulnerable on every level, could not defend themselves. This is the biblical example of who the church should be taking care of and looking after, is looking after the most vulnerable in a society. And if you're not looking after, and I know the entire black community was definitely vulnerable, but especially the women and the children during this time, this is where the church should have shined. Think about it, a ministry to be able to take care of the turned out people. people, the ones where they were essentially free. They just had pretty much reached their expiration date. And because they weren't animals, they just didn't go out and kill them, even though they were treated like animals. The churches could have took them in. They could have had opportunities to be able to minister. And even though I know that we can't right the wrongs of the past, I understand that. But the thing is, the same creativity that is needed to be able to meet the needs of the vulnerable of our society, that ingenuity is needed today. And I think Sojourner would be the one to be able to bark from the mountaintops that it is time for the churches to take the lead, not sitting around waiting until it's comfortable for us to be able to make a move, to be able to say, now's a good time. Now culture is accepted. Now I won't lose my tithing members because I am making a stand about racial prejudice. I believe she would speak to the church and she would speak to it loud. That's why the Black community is screaming out, I wish we were babies, because I believe we would have sympathy and empathy as far as in the vulnerable of our society. We ought to fight every injustice that's inside of us if we are going to be children of God. And I believe her message would be to the church. So with that being said,
you're preaching
Aaron,
there, sir. You're preaching.
Yeah, I'm a little passionate about it. Wait till we do the episode about the church. What's the message of the church as a whole?
I just need a moment of invitation. So we just need to give these people a moment to pause, reflect.
They can hit that little pause button and then pray to Jesus and come back around. All right, I want to end with Malcolm X. So Aaron, I want you to tell me the message, and then Anton, clear up some things, because I'm sure Malcolm X is probably the most controversial character of all.
Yeah, and I think here's one of the things I want to say as I jump into mine of what Melba, because Melba's still alive, so she can actually really speak for herself in some of these things. But when we start looking at these people, I hope that no one listening kind of like pushes these people off. Oh, Sojourner Truth, woman preacher, we don't believe in that. Or Malcolm X, controversial here, I don't even need to listen to the rest, because here's the thing. It's funny how we make passes for the people that we want to make passes for.
That's the truth.
when we want to, we'll like, oh, well, they were blah, 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 blah. But they did this good thing. So stop and listen.
That founding father was a Mason, but we give him a pass. It's okay.
Exactly. So let's pause and actually like make sure. And I think most people who listen to this do, right? I've had so many good conversations with people who listen. So I think they do, but I just want to pause and say that. But as we jump into Melba, one of the things I think she would tell us today, in fact, I'm going to try to read her exact, her words, right? And so I'll read for just a second. So have patience with me, but this is her own writing. She says, when I watched the news footage of the day we entered school, guarded by the 101st soldiers, I am moved by the enormity of that experience. I believe that was a moment when the whole nation took one giant step forward. Once President Eisenhower made that kind of commitment to uphold the law, there was no turning back. So when President Eisenhower sends these troops, I'm pausing for just a second for the reading, sends these troops in to protect these students, she says, and even though later on he would waver and not wholeheartedly back up his powerful decision, he had stepped over a line that no other president had ever dared cross. Thereafter, the threat of military intervention would always exist whenever a Southern governor thought of using his office to defy the federal law. So we keep going. I marvel at the fact that in the midst of this historic confrontation, we 9 teenagers weren't maimed or killed. Believe me, it was only by the grace of God and the bravery of those few good men, some of them white men. I never allow myself to forget that although I was abused by many white people during that incident, without the help of other law-abiding whites who risked their lives, I wouldn't be around to tell this story. And so she goes through a little bit more in her own writings, but I feel like what she tells us is, number one, we haven't come as far as we think we have. We've come a long ways, right? We've come a long ways in that I didn't have to experience this by going to a predominantly white school, but we still have room to grow. And she speaks to, and if you listen to Melba or read her writing, she is not mad at all white people because some white girl pulled her hair and shoved a sharp object into her back and her shirt is literally covered in blood and the teachers will do nothing about it. She doesn't hate all white people. She's thankful for the people that helped, and she's rose to the occasion by the great grace of God, and she herself has trusted in God as a believer to continue to walk forward. And so I think she'd tell us today, hey, we haven't come as far as we think we have. We've come some places, right? But there's still some things we need to work on, and not just work on it. And she'd speak to the Black folks and say, hey, we don't have to hate all white people. And I think this is what our episode last time, right, about why have Black history. I can look to Melba as such a wonderful example of courage.
Yes.
And not hate anyone. Like think like, wow, some difficult things happen and we need to have some difficult conversations. But she herself does not believe that she has to hate or anything like that to be able to further her cause. And so I find her a great person looking Black history because, see, as Anton was talking about last episode, the goal of Black History Month should make this our history. And so if this is our history, we're moving forward, but we still have some things that we need to work on. And this is history, but it's not, as Tavian would say, he calls black and white TV shows silver and gray or something. I can't remember, but he calls black and white shows silver and gray. These aren't silver and gray moments. These are moments that people still live through today. And just like you said about your father-in-law, that these people are still around today that remember a lot of these situations. So when people say, why are you Black folks mad about things that happened hundreds of years ago? Well, because some of it is still happening. So we still need to grow through some of those. So that's mine.
Mm. That's excellent. I think that almost we could do the podcast could just be this. You know what I'm saying? I'm listening to these stories. It's challenging me. It's making me think in so many different areas. And so, and hearing the names and being refreshed, I think this is very helpful. Obviously this is us doing it, so I'm biased, but you get the point.
This is the best podcast ever.
Yeah. So it really is helpful. I believe they see these different perspectives. So let's go ahead. We're going to go ahead now with Malcolm X, Anton. Obviously, probably one of the figures that many people might scratch their head that you're choosing for Black history. We like to hang around the Martin Luther Kings, but not necessarily the Malcolms. And so, Anton, what do you give us a little bit of what Malcolm's message would be?
Can I say something before I get to Malcolm?
Absolutely.
When you bring up Sojourner Truth, because I know it would bother me if I didn't say it, ain't I a woman is not her speech. And it is something that I've read in many textbooks. Sojourner Truth.
Ain't I a woman? Are you kidding?
It's not her speech. Her speech never contained the words, ain't I a woman. That is a rewrite of her speech by Francis Dana Barker later in the Civil War. Sojourner Truth, obviously, as you pointed out, is a Dutch speaker and from New York. This is a very Southern drawl speech that was written by someone else later. Sojourner Truth did not speak like that at all, and it's commonly often said, and everyone associates Ain't I a Woman with Sojourner Truth, although she never said Ain't I a Woman. This is another speech written by someone else to make Sojourner Truth sound like a black slave from the South, although she's not a black slave from the South. She's Dutch.
Well, I need to do more homework. I do know that with her speaking Dutch, and different things that for her to learn English, I mean, I don't know where her broken English would have then had to have learned from her third owner, whoever it was. But wow, I guess fact checker. Well, no, so I'm curious. I have to do some study about that.
This is from history.com.
Do what?
The speech was briefly reported to contemporary newspapers, and a transcript of the speech was published in the Anti-Slavery Bugle on June 12, 1851. It received wider publicity in 1863 during the American Civil War when Francis Dana Barker Gage published a different version, one which became known as Ain't I a Woman. Because it's oft-repeated question, this later and better known, more widely available version has been the one referenced by most historians. But again, she didn't say that. That's just a bunch of people saying she said it to make her sound like a crazy son.
Wow.
She's not a crazy son.
Well, Anton's they're fact checking me. So, all right, good. Well done. All right. So get back in your own business and tell me about Malcolm. I'm just messing. I'm glad that you pointed out, especially on the live on the podcast, because we don't want there to be those thoughts thinking that we're not being careful about our sources. So yeah, Anton, Malcolm X.
The things that I believe Malcolm would say today, and it's, to me, I guess I would first go ahead and point out, I know the criticism that Malcolm's going to receive. One is going to be that Malcolm made racist statements, which to anyone saying that, that's completely fair. I wouldn't deny it or argue with that, especially in his youth when Malcolm was calling white people the devil and let's just say making a lot of racist statements. But I think it's fair to say that a lot of our founding fathers are racist and that we've given them a pass. So to sit here and to hold Malcolm to a standard we hold no one else to is unfair to Malcolm. And to me, that's what always sidelines Malcolm, is racist. And the second one is usually cause to violence, which it always, again, annoys me because I remember growing up, one of my favorite quotes, Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. We look at that as heroic, patriotic. When Malcolm says the ballot or the bullet, when black people are being lynched, somehow he's inciting a riot. These are very similar statements. I mean, when Patrick Henry says, give me liberty, give me death, it's clear he's not talking about he's going to have a heart attack. Like, it's obvious what he's talking about. Like,
you are so controversial. Look at you, man.
So
I'm
to
following,
me,
though. I'm tracking.
Yeah, I feel you. I feel you. Yeah.
So to me, it is disingenuous to, again, hold Malcolm to this standard we hold none of the other quote unquote patriots to. In the world Malcolm grew up, I mean, again, his house was burned down by white supremacists. His father, according to his autobiography, was killed by white supremacists. It's obvious that in the world he lived in, he was trying to save his life and people who look like him, if you want to say black people, save their lives as well. So to pretend that, again, we have to concede that because he's a racist, he's relegated to the backseat or had nothing good to say, or because he is inciting a riot, which, again, I think is somewhat ridiculous, that we have to put him on the back is bad also. So when I look at Malcolm, again, bringing it to what I think he would say today, I think Malcolm is, again, he's the father figure and MLK is the mother figure of the civil rights movement. And I think at times, and I'm glad Aaron picked someone, and I don't want to use the term meek in a negative way. That's not what I'm saying at all. I mean, I think there's a lot of meek people that, again, that's a great character trait to have. But I think also there are two sides to that coin. There are times when one must fight back. And I know that sounds terrible to say because nobody ever likes to say that. I don't think there's a success of the civil rights movement without Malcolm. I don't. I
agree
do.
with that.
I believe that there is a certain amount of truth that when someone punches you in the face, sometimes you got to stand up to the bully. And it's, again, not popular to say, but I think at that time, Malcolm was one of the first people to ever, and again, I say this not to, like, again, make this black versus white. The reason I love Malcolm, like I read his autobiography and it speaks to me, is because most historical figures, George Washington, he didn't fight for me. He didn't care about me. Like, that's the truth. Like, I mean, we can all pretend different. Wow. Malcolm fought for me. Malcolm cared about me. And that does mean something. I can't pretend that it doesn't. Because it's refreshing to finally look at a historical figure and say, now that guy, he wanted me to succeed. And I think when, again, in a Black History Month, it's good to understand as, if you're white and listening to this, that it's rare that as a black person where you're sitting in your history class and people are like, yeah, he was a patriot, he cared. And you're like, yeah, Thomas Jefferson really cared about me. I'm sure he was like, that black guy, I hope he makes it out. It's so rare that although all the people we talk about, it's so rare to have a guy that's like, he would, not only would he have, because again, understanding how Malcolm changed in the end, and that's the other thing that I respect so much, is the ability to have been wrong and openly admit that. And at the end to know, people are probably going to kill me, but I would rather do the right thing for the people I care about and die than be alive. It's so rare for someone to have done that for me. There's just not many historical figures. And again, we're not talking religious. I'm not putting Jesus or anything else. I'm talking about just historical figures. It's rare that they did that for me. And I guess that's why Malcolm means a lot to me.
Do you think he gets a really bad rap because of the Nation of Islam too, as well? I mean, because there's always, obviously we look in our history, American history and stuff, and September 11th and different things, war there on Islam and different things. Do you think if he were of a different religion, so to speak, if he had not subscribed to Nation of Islam at some point, do you think that would have changed people's perspective of him at all? Or is he still just because the ballot or the bullet, I mean, that was just going to be his MO?
I think he would have had a bad rap either way. Like, again, it's something else that I would but there's one more thing I would say is that I think if you look, and that's why I call Malcolm the masculine figure, people who talk like Malcolm who are black, it never ends well. Like, I mean, the sweet way is always the way that's going to be written down. The I have a dream is better than the I demand right now. And although...
That was gold, man.
And I understand that, and I can see why that is. But again, I don't think it's wrong for someone to say I demand right now. Because again, I think when dad comes in and says I'm laying down the law, nobody likes it, but it's necessary. And yeah, like I said, I like Malcolm. I'm not going to take it away.
Wow. So I guess to recap what you were saying, so you don't have a civil rights movement. We don't have a Martin if you don't have a Malcolm.
Oh, yeah. Mom's hug means nothing until dad's laid down the law. Then mom's hug means the world. Mom's like, I'm going to smack your hand. And dad shows up with a belt, and you're like, the hand? Good. I'm okay with that.
I don't know if I use that exact thing, but I agree with you.
So let me just get real quick, just kind of push back with it. His autobiography. How many times do you personally cringe? I mean, I know your viewpoint. I know where you're coming from. But if you said, hey, read Malcolm's bio, what kind of prep would you give me for that?
I wouldn't give you much prep. That's my thing with Malcolm. It's like people act like Malcolm was like the worst dude in the world. Don't get me wrong. Malcolm did bad things. I would be the first to say that. But overall, Malcolm was an unsaved man living in the 1960s. I'm pretty sure you could read anyone's biography from the time and it would be similar. Like, it's not like, I mean, he wasn't out murdering people. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't understand. People are always like, but what was he really doing? It's like, I mean, he was a guy in the 60s.
Yeah.
Wow.
Can I add something to that? Like right now, I am reading the biography, which I've read one before, but of Lucy and Desi Arnaz, right? And
are you really? I Love Lucy?
Yeah, I love Lucy because I love Lucy. So I thought I'd read it. But when I read it, Desi Arnaz is a horrible person.
He is. That is fair.
He's a horrible person. But on the I Love Lucy show, and what we want to go back to, right? Let's go back to the days of Andy Griffith, as I can't say it, Andy Griffith, and I Love Lucy, and Leave It to Beaver, and blah, blah, blah. I don't know anything about the Leave It to Beaver folks because I didn't love Leave It to Beaver. but when you start listening, like Anton says, like we may look at Desi Arnaz as like, oh, if we go back to that part, but Desi Arnaz was a horrible person, terrible person. Lucy wasn't that much better. So. But we look at him because we saw him on television smiling and kissing and laughed at it, that we think that all of a sudden there are these great people. And I think, like Anton says, we give passes sometimes these people, and like certain people in the 60s and 50s and 60s or whatever that lived a certain way because we saw such and such. But and let's call out Martin, right? Martin had his problems.
He did. Absolutely.
I love Dr. King, but Dr. King had a few problems too. So when we start thinking about these, like Anton says, you don't give a pass. You're not like, oh, everybody sins, but we are going to give grace in some circumstances and be like, well, I'm not living in this day. The same way I would love to tell you, like Melba, that I would go onto a school and let people stab me with a pen or a pencil, and I just say, thank you. I appreciate that because I'm making history right here. It ain't happening. I probably been one of the first people expelled. They're like, don't talk to them. Don't say anything about that. Everybody's telling them, hey, if you fight back, you will get it. You will get in trouble for this. Not one of, and I say white here just because of the context, but not one of these white kids is getting in trouble because they beat you up in the hallway. You will get in trouble if you say or do anything to them in regards to this. And so I would love to tell you that I would have acted just like the godly Christian man I should, but that probably wasn't going to happen.
You know, history is recorded by those who wield the influence. And then since it's controlled by those that wield the influence, that means the narrative then is controlled as well. And what we want to remember, we remember. And who we want to demonize, we can truly demonize. That's for sure. And I hope that from the podcast, you know, we want there to be a balance of seeing how everybody then is viewed and how all this is seen. But we want to highlight some different individuals from history, Black history specifically, for us to be able to know not just the highlight moments, crowning moments, but what made him do some of the things that they have done in the past. And so this has been a helpful conversation. Do you guys anything else you want to add? Melba and Malcom and Sojourner, I think this is a great start for us as we continue down this thought process of Black History Month of highlighting these figures. Anything else y'all guys want to add before we close it out?
Well, let me answer this real quick. Can all of us, can I hear from you guys what resource you think it would be, like whether a YouTube video or a book, or where would be a good introduction to these folks?
I would just say any of the books by Sojourner Truth. I mean, apparently Ain't I a Woman isn't a thing. So Anton, which I'm going to go look up. It's a thing. It's just that's not the transcript, because I'm looking at a copy right now and it's like, well, I guess it was taken from what she had said, because she had been known to dictate a lot of things. And so because she couldn't read or write, obviously, so she's known to dictate a lot of things. So oral tradition is probably how a lot of her things came together. But anyway, all that to say is I would say pretty much any one of those autobiographies and different things that I have seen, I don't know if you can go wrong. And this is exactly what I did. Went to the library, typed in Sojourner, and I just started reading. So I don't have a specific one that I would recommend. I kind of pulled from different ones, but yeah, I would just say, do more than a Wikipedia search. That's what I would say, more than a Wikipedia search. But other than that, I mean, but Wikipedia is good as going to get, then that's fine. Yeah. So that's where I'd say. Anton, what about you and Malcolm? Autobiography?
Yeah, Autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley.
Yes, I've read it, and like you said, there's some hard moments in it. But then you look at, after I finished, I felt so bad for the man.
Exactly. That's
like, there's so much going on.
No, I'm just saying, whenever anyone brings up anything, it's like, again, much like what you were describing in the hallways and what's going on at that school. Imagine the life Malcolm X was placed in. That's why it's like, if you placed anyone in a completely racist environment, where one of their parents was murdered, where their house was burned down by a white supremacist organization, you're probably not going to get a well-balanced individual who's just right. I mean, you get what you get. Like,
broken. Yeah. He was broken. Wow. So Aaron, what about you?
I'm going to say, I'm going to recommend her own book, Warriors Don't Cry. She has another one, and I think there's other two ones, but from what I've researched, and I haven't completed the other ones, but I've started. And I would say Warriors Don't Cry if you want to get what I feel like is the best aspect, I guess, if you're talking about the camera view of her time in the school there, without some of the other things in her life, which the other things in her life aren't bad. But if you just want that kind of thing, I'd say Warriors Don't Cry. Her book was pretty helpful to me and enlightening. And like, as I read it, like Malcolm, I have not read on Sojourner Truth, but I'm looking forward to it. But like Malcolm, you're just brought to a point where, wow, this is hard, and I don't know how I would respond to this. So Warriors Don't Cry.
All right. Oh, great picks then as far as us going at it. And if you as an audience have different individuals that you say, hey, look, this person, it might be less well known, but there's a different perspective. Or if you want to lend a perspective upon one of the individuals that we have mentioned, we definitely invite you to do that. We appreciate you joining us for this special episode here during Black History Month. Hopefully you join us next week for another highlighting of different Black individuals who have definitely made a difference in Black history. Thank you so much for joining us.